Right, thank you, that probably helps. As a broadcast journalist, that's the first big error I've made in a long time. Okay, let's start it from the top again. Hello and welcome to this discussion on ageism in the newsroom, and when are you too old to either work or make the headlines or write the headlines? I'm Annette Young, the host and creator of The 51%, a show on France 24, which is about women reshaping our world. I have a personal interest in this subject because I'm outing myself here, in my 50s. And as you can imagine, there are not too many female television presenters of my age group on networks around the world. So, how often have we heard that journalism is indeed a young person's game? Why does our industry frequently make it so difficult, or more importantly, not welcome older employees? Now, for a newsroom to be truly representative of a society, should we not accommodate older and more experienced journalists? And when we talk about diversity and inclusion, of which there's been many panels about this subject here at the festival, why is ageism not on the list? I have here next to me some incredibly wonderful and powerful women. So let me introduce you. In the centre with me is Kate O'Brien, who's currently the head of the news group at Scripps Network, where she oversees the network's Newsy and Court TV. Her CV is extraordinary. She founded her own consultancy on assisting media companies with content development, strategy, and executive leadership. She was the president of Al Jazeera America upon its launch in 2013, and before then was senior vice president of ABC News. Also with me is Inga Thordar, an award-winning media executive and newsroom director, former executive editor at CNN Digital, also previously a senior editor at BBC News. She is passionate about diversity and inclusion in newsrooms and has led changes and initiatives in both organisations in this field. Finally, but not last, is Deborah Copacan, who's a New York Times best-selling author of several books of non-fiction and fiction, including Shutter Babe and Lady Parts, among others, a contributing writer at The Atlantic. She's also an Emmy Award-winning news producer and photojournalist, and most importantly, her Substack, also called Lady Parts, has become her growing insurance against ageism in journalism. So thanks to all three women for making themselves available for this session. I'm going to start off by quoting equality and generational impact specialist Aviva Wittenberg-Cox. While lifespans have extended, mindsets have not. Long lives require a rethink. Longevity will impact the young as much as it will the old. So we all need to think about an extended period in the workforce, and also how to protect and pace yourself across what possibly could be between 9 to 10 decades on this earth. Not to mention, many of us, as we approach retirement, are facing the reality of, can we afford to retire even if we wish to? So I'm going to start off by asking my panellists, perhaps starting off with Deborah at the end of the panel. Ageism does seem to be the last barrier in the newsroom culture when it comes to forms of discrimination, doesn't it, Deborah?
Yeah, so yesterday we went to a panel on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I was surprised to hear that age was never even mentioned in that panel. And I went up to the panelists afterwards and I asked them, why didn't you consider age? And they said, actually, when we saw your panel, we thought to ourselves, oh, we really need to consider age, but they hadn't collected data for that, right? Just to give you an idea of my own personal story, I'm 56 years old. I'm a New York Times bestselling author. I have, the Emmy, everything she said, and I lost my job due to COVID layoffs in March of 2020 while I was actually battling COVID myself. And I have been unable to find a full-time job since. I have sent out 100 resumes, 100 cover letters, and I just couldn't find a job. It's not that I was getting interviewed and getting rejected. I wasn't getting an email back. I wasn't getting any response. I was being ghosted by the entire media. In the meantime, because we're American and we need health insurance, right? I'm 56, I've had cervical cancer, I've had breast cancer, I need health insurance, right? Somebody read my book, Lady Parts, which is all about the issue of health insurance and growing older in America. And it took a billionaire's daughter who took pity on me and granted me free health insurance until I turned 65, so that now I'm actually free to not have to find a job and do my Substack. And I'm editing a bunch of books, and I'm writing my own book, and I'm working for The Atlantic. But I am not on staff of any of these places, and there's no protection for a woman of my age if you don't have a staff job. Meanwhile, you're getting pushed out at 50, and they do this in a very specific way. They put you on a PIP, performance improvement plan. It's just a way of getting you out. So I have a lot more to say, but I would like to leave time for the other panelists to speak as well.
Kate, your thoughts?
My history, my background is in broadcast television. And when I started, I'm a proud 63-year-old, I think I'm the oldest person on the panel. When I started 40-some years ago, there was literally no expectation that anybody, male or female, frankly, would work past 50, because it was a young man's world, a young man's job, a young man's profession. And so at an early age, I started trying to think, well, what am I going to do later? What comes next? Now, I've hung in there, maybe by the skin of my teeth, but it's still the case. By and large, it's far worse for women than for men, but I see it with men as well. And interestingly, I posted that I was going to be on this panel on LinkedIn, and the people who have commented on my post are all men, and all men who could not get back into the media world when they were after 50. So I think this is ageism is a problem that exists and nobody wants to really pay attention to. But I think it affects women far more than men, but it affects everybody.
Inky?
Yeah, I think I've got the dubious honor of being youngest on the panel, so I'm in my 40s. And I think it's kind of funny when your question was, is ageism the last bastion? I don't think it's necessarily the last one. I think that there are other diversity issues, like disability, that hardly ever get discussed. And not to mention, not sort of visible disabilities, but I think ageism it's the one that is hardest to kind of talk about. People don't want to tell you their age, And I remember when in the UK when they stopped, when people stopped putting their age on their CVs, and they stopped putting their, and I can see it now. You can see it on social media that people are taking the birth year out because it's seen as a stigma. And I think it's really interesting how that has sort of developed, I think, over the last 5 or 10 years. I mean, when we all signed up for things in the past and it was said, when is your birthday? And we'd all proudly put in every detail. And then it's been, people are gradually moving it because of that. And I think that that's sort of problematic. And I mean, asking people their age, you remember when you said you never ask a lady her age. I don't think that's just a lady. I think that asking people's age is seen as a bad thing, because if you don't answer in the right age bracket, if you're not ticking the right box, that is seen as something that counts against you. And I think that needs to be broken, because, the people in their 50s, in their 60s, in their 40s, they probably contribute a hell of a lot more to society and to, wage-wise, experience-wise, and otherwise too. And for them, the more experienced you are, the more you are prejudiced against. This seems like a very odd equation to me.
But I think there's a deep misconception in the business that the younger people, the people who are closest to learning what they learned in school, actually know the most, because they may know the latest technology, but it's not true. There are people who've been in the business for decades who actually know more and can learn the technology. The technology that is something that anyone can learn. Wisdom and experience is, only comes with having done the work.
Yeah.
I mean-
I would agree with that, and I think the key point there is that people think that when you reach a certain age, you stop, absorbing information and learning, and you just think, where did you get that from? I mean, and I think that's incredible.
I just want to ask now, given what we've just been talking about, perhaps I will direct this question to both Kate and Inky in terms of working in 24-hour news channels and so on. What is our industry losing out from consistently skewing its content to a younger demographic?
Well, right off the bat, I know what is lost as an institutional memory, but not an institutional memory about the news organization, an institutional memory about news. The number of times that I have been in a news organization where a name comes up from the past. There's a story that surfaces somebody from the past, and nobody in the room knows who that person is. I mean, it's terrifying, actually. And for me, I now oversee a 24/7 news organization, and as we were hiring people, I was looking for people who, should a breaking news event happen, be able to continue on air or get in front of a camera and talk without notes and without research, because when breaking news happens, it takes a minute or two to get information into the system, with knowledge and with authority. And if you can't do that, if you don't know the players, if you can't say, oh, this person was, in that story 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, then you're not doing your job as a news organization. So it's absolutely paramount.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. And one thing I would add is that I think I was in the digital space for a long time, and the sub-editors, before a story goes out, I had a man on my team who was by far older than others. It doesn't just give you knowledge, it also gives you confidence to put the publish button. You know that these people, they can edit, you can edit really quickly because you know it, and you've also gained the confidence throughout your experience to say, we're done, out it goes. Whereas I often find with people who are gathering that experience, it's really like they have to ask for a second opinion or a second pair of eyes, or is it okay if I publish? Whereas, once you've reached that stage of confidence, I always had full confidence in what he was doing. I would, if there was breaking news and he was in the newsroom, I'm like, we're going to be fine, because I knew that he would have the experience and the confidence to get the story out and didn't need more. And I think we sometimes underestimate how much experience gives you confidence to do your job.
I think it's very important to talk about corporate knowledge, especially at the moment where we've got massive news events such as the war in Ukraine. There has been some criticism in my home country, Australia, as to the level or degree of reporting done by younger reporters on the ground in Ukraine. And I think we constantly undermine the importance of that corporate knowledge as such, don't we, Deborah? I mean, what do older employees bring to the table without stating the obvious?
Well, so I covered Afghanistan at 22, right, during the Soviet war. And I knew nothing, and I made a lot of mistakes. And then, once I was working with Kate, well, we didn't know we were working together, but once I was at ABC News and I had a decade under my belt, then I had the confidence to know, well, this is a good part of the story, this is a bad part of the story. Don't interview this person, interview that person. Experience is important, and I think also we should mention that, a lot of us raised children, and we had all these constraints on our time because there were doctor's appointments and kids got sick and all this thing. My children are grown. This is a perfect time for me to be in the workplace again. And at the exact moment that women are ready and able to work, we have no more constraints on our time. It's like, goodbye.
But if you look at it with a very cold, hard business approach, and you look at the clientele, the customers, the viewers, the readers, the listeners, the subscribers, the reality is that the bulk of the wealth in many countries, particularly in the developed north, is held by the older age group. For instance, the Financial Times, which is something we reported on the 51%, estimated within the next 3 to 5 years, the bulk of wealth will be held by 80%, of the bulk of wealth will be held by older people over the age of 50, and as that age increase, bulk of that would be women, because it's women who live longer. And, we've talked also among ourselves about the buying power of women aged over 50, yet newsroom managers, publishers, advertising agencies still refuse to see it.
The advertising business, I really don't understand what the appeal of the younger customer is. There must be some algorithm that makes sense to all of the advertising world. And this is really in the American advertising world. I don't know what it's like globally. But it doesn't matter how much buying power somebody over 50 has. The advertisers make their determinations about a younger viewer. Therefore, the ratings companies rate the younger viewer at a higher level. Therefore, the news organizations get a higher revenue per viewer based on the younger viewer. And so the companies, the business people in the companies are purposefully skewing the content for a younger viewer, even as we know, generally, the news viewer is an older viewer, and on cable, the news viewer is generally 55 and older. But the companies are at the mercy of ratings and the ad business.
And this is how it plays out in editorial. So, for example, and I'm not going to name the newspaper, but I was working with a very prominent newspaper on an article about vaginal estrogen and UTIs, a really important topic for any woman over 50. We worked really hard, me and my female editor. We got a great story together, and then she bumped it up to the 4 men who were above her, and they're like, ew, vaginas, UTIs. And and that's how I started publishing my Substack, because I was like, this information needs to get out there. It's going to gross out your advertisers. Well, when I put that on my Substack, I got 76 paid subscriptions in one day, which means there is interest in this. These are all strangers, right? And we are not then publishing stories that are important to our older viewers and our older readers because we're worried about the advertising. I mean, that is insane to me.
Inky?
Yeah, it was interesting that there was a survey done in the UK recently where it says that 41% of women over 50 do not feel that they're represented by society. And yet they have an incredible amount of buying power. I mean, I guess I feel slightly conflicted here. I'm going to be controversial. I understand that media companies need to secure themselves for the future, and the younger audience is incredibly difficult to reach. But what is kind of beyond me is why both can't happen at the same time. And there is sort of like one has to be at the expense of another. And I think that to me is an interesting sort of contradiction within the media world, and something that they have to tackle. If I look at my household, for example, my son who's 18, he gets his news from YouTube and TikTok, and mainly. He has no buying power in the household, none. He does not decide where we go on holiday. He definitely does not do any shopping, And then when I look at, what are the news that are given to me, they're still trying to appeal to him. They're still trying to get him. They're just not. They're not going to get him. But they've got me right here, and I'm still not feeling represented. And I think that is a huge problem within it. So it's kind of like you're trying to do something that you're not succeeding in at the expense of the people that can be there. I think that there, in a creative and innovative industry, there has to be a way of not losing the people that will keep your advertisers happy, whilst not kind of building the sort of bridge to the future with the younger people.
But that's just part of the problem. That is a large part of the problem. But the other part of the problem is societal, and that people over a certain age in our Western societies, this is not true in Asian societies. In our Western society, people over a certain age are just not valued, and women in particular are just not valued. And so I'm not sure how you go about, to change society, it's a very slow process. It's an evolution. I wish it were a revolution. If revolution succeeded, we would have been here already in, the late 70s when we were
Deborah?
starting the revolution.
I when I hear things like this, and when I think about, I spent a summer living in Japan where the elderly are just revered. And the fact that, I did a survey and I asked people to tell me what they felt who were women over 50. And one woman was saying, well, I went to my hairdresser and he said, well, maybe you should stop, dyeing your hair gray. And I said, have you ever been a woman trying to get a job at my age? And just the sadness that came into my inbox just from this one question, how has ageism affected you? And of course, none of them would go on the record because they said, if I go on the record, then I'm out there in the internet as somebody who's older than 50. And then also, women, I've worked in Hollywood as well. The women of Hollywood who are my age are trying to get their birthdays taken off of IMDb, the internet database for movies. And IMDb makes you jump through a million hoops just to get your birthday off. You have to upload this document and that document, and still, some of them can't get their birthdays off, and they can't get work. They cannot get work if they're older than 50.
At this point, you're probably wondering, why are there 4 women on this panel? I want to just give a little bit of a backstory in asking people to be part of this session. I sent out many emails and texts, both men and women, a number of whom refused to because they believed it would be a career killer, as one told me. These are people who are very established, some of whom are prominent in their field as journalists, but they were terrified about talking about the fact that they were above the age of 50 or near to the age of 50 and so on. And that itself speaks millions. So it is not with intention that I have just women on this panel. But having said that, there is a double whammy for older women. We face both ageism and sexism. And as I pointed out at the beginning of this session, I can count on one hand in an organisation of between 300 to 400, where I work at France 24, of women aged over 50. Of that group, the majority of them are not on air. What does that mean for you, the viewer? What message does that send out to society? What does it mean about our value to society? So let me now ask my panellists their response to that. Perhaps, Deborah, at the end, do you want to kick off?
I'm sorry, what is the question?
The question is, the problem with not having older women on air, both in film and television, and these days online?
Well, let me speak to one specific idea of this, which is that I was a consultant on the TV show Younger, right? And in that show, what was her name? Sutton Foster pretended to be younger to get a job. And then suddenly she's getting this, then I was thinking, but she's only getting probably $35,000 a year. How is she living her life on this salary? That's the other issue, is that women are always told that older women are told we're too expensive, right? And when you talk about sexism and ageism, I want to mention 2 things in particular, because I think it's important to note, for example, I found out recently, I was working at a job called cafe.com in 2013, 2014. I was getting paid $39,000 a year, and the man next to me, same alma mater, same position, was getting $200,000. 39 to 200,000. Sexism also exists, as we know from Harvey Weinstein and the Me Too movement, as sexual harassment. I left that job that was earning $39,000 to go work at The Observer, and I was sexually harassed out of that job. My sexual harasser was nominated to the Trump White House. I wrote an article about this for The Atlantic. My inbox was filled with similar tales, not just of sexual harassment, but of sexual harassment at the hands of this one man, Ken Kurson, who I'm not afraid to name at this point because he knows. The FBI show up at my house because he's named to the White House. He gets arrested for one of the instances that I tell them. Trump pardons him on the last day in office. I go to the FBI, I said, who's protecting me? And they said, well, you can always go into witness protection. I mean, sexism has far-reaching tentacles. It's not just like, oh, it's terrible being sexually harassed. It's terrible getting paid $39,000 to your compatriots, male compatriots, $200,000. This is emotional too. We are dealing with the emotional, financial fallout from being a woman and an older woman in the working world.
Kate and Inky again, with many older women being phased off air, what does that mean for the viewer?
Well, it's like, I mean, we're rightfully spending a lot of time in the last few years talking about DEI and the very, very important fact of representation and what representation means. I mean, yesterday we saw Ketanji Brown Jackson become a Supreme Court justice. I got emotional. That representation that she is showing young women, young black women in the U.S., you can't take that place in any other way. It's the same with not having women who are over 50 on your air. It's the same as not having women and men who are experienced on your air. And we're just talking about the on-air part because there's the whole behind the scenes is a whole other thing. If you're sitting at home and you're only watching 25-year-olds on telling you the news, are you going to understand or feel that, oh, that person really knows as much? Am I learning from that person because that person is much younger than I and therefore may not have had as much experience in the world as I? Representation counts.
Inky.
Yeah, and I think you get representation when those behind the scenes who are making decisions around who's on air and who's there also have an understanding of that sort of world. And I think, I mean, there are definitely maybe more women getting into those positions, but as you can attest to, it takes a while and it's a very squiggly kind of progression. But we're seeing some of them. But I sometimes feel that those women of my generation that get there are still too afraid to talk about these issues. There are a few brave women in the UK that are in leadership position who are happy to put themselves out there and talk about the issues that around ageism. And good on them, and we need more of them. But I think that at the moment we are underrepresented in women and women of a certain age in newsroom. Those women being able to talk about it and not being met by resistance at a higher level. It's sexism for women mainly, for things to change. And I just think that everyone always has to go through an awful experience or some kind of a life experience for things to change. And it just feels like society should, get on board with that. Shouldn't happen all the time.
I mean, it should get to the point where this change is happening organically. And I will do a shout out to my company. I have a woman boss. I have women peers. I started this last job just about a year ago, and my first Zoom meeting, I wish to this day, I wish I had taken a photo of it, was a meeting with my boss and some of my peers. Every face on the Zoom was a woman, and every face on the Zoom was a woman over 40, at least some over 50. And it was remarkable to me. I mean, it was sad that it was remarkable to me, because it should not have been remarkable to me. And I've said many times the way to shortcut the solution is to have women in charge of everything.
Yes, I suspect the world would be a different place. Deborah, we're talking here about representation, and now I want to shift the conversation to what can we do, because we've all established what the problems are, but what can we do? So in your case, as somebody who's worked across multiple platforms, and this is a big question, what would you prioritise in order to bring about change in news outlets that allow women of above a certain age and men basically people above a certain age, to stay within the workforce and to be appreciated? What needs to be done?
I think that there's two things we need to talk about. One is female mentorship, and the other is internalized sexism, okay? So female mentorship, right? We need to have conversations between older women and younger women in the newsroom. We need to have friendships, dinner parties. I had an older female mentor who meant the world to me, and I'm so grateful for her. I've also had older women in organizations who've swallowed what I call the internalized sexism pill, and who, to get where they got, they feel that they had to act like a man to get where they got, and therefore they are discriminating against the very women that they could be mentoring. So we have to stop being mean to each other and start being kind to one another. At the same time, that's my optimistic side. My pessimistic side is I spoke to a lawyer who specializes in these cases, in ageism cases, and she essentially said to me, Deb, give up. When women turn 50, they have to pivot, and I tell all my young women that come in here, that 34 for a job contract or whatever, know what you're going to do at 50, because you will be shoved out. And this is not just media. This is industry, every industry in the US right now. You will be shoved out. You need to figure out your reinvention plan. Men are not told this. Men get to work until 60, 65. And I know we have some issues with men getting back into the media, but by and large, her business is women older than 50, and she has a very growing big business as a employment lawyer who just says to women over and over again, I have a sister who works at a giant pharmaceutical company who's 49 years old, hitting her 50th birthday, and guess what they're trying to do? She's made them millions. They're trying to force her out. It's not just journalism. It's all industries. That's my pessimism.
Okay, Kate, we've spoken between you and I about the fact that you are embarking on a massive hiring operation. What are the challenges in managing a mixed age workforce, and what needs to be done?
Well, it's interesting that there are different levels of challenge. One of the first levels is financial, because the people who have been in the business longest are paid higher wages than the people coming in. And so as the leader, as the manager, making these decisions, hiring hundreds of people, you have to look at your budgets and figure out, okay, what can we spend on this, what can we spend on that, and be open-minded about it, or be intentional about bringing the right kind of people in and maybe figure out how to save money elsewhere. But that is an issue, and it also becomes an issue internally when you have two people in the same job. One has 30 years more experience than the next person. Well, that person will have been more expensive to hire. And that creates challenges within the organization where people...
Do you get pushback from other colleagues when you say, I've got a much younger person and I've got someone here who's got 20, 30 years experience, that more experienced person I want, but it's going to cost us more?
I don't. But I work for an extraordinary company.
Inky, in your case, you were until relatively recently working at CNN. And again, I want to ask you that question. I'm not sure of the demographics of your organisation, but what was it like managing a mixed age workforce?
Do you know, it was great fun. I think that on the whole, the younger sort of members of the team appreciated the experience of the older, and we try to do this reverse mentoring where they were learning from each other, and we facilitated that across not just my team but across the organization, and I think that was beneficial in many ways, because I think the confidence of the younger people grew, and that sort of technological kind of advantage that the younger generations have benefited the older generation. But I mean, I would have loved to have more people in my team, but I think that the reason why I didn't have as many people in the sort of bracket of 45 plus was probably because the jobs were at a lower level, and I just didn't get the applications, and yet I took out like a whole lot of, because I think the criteria for job applications right now they put people off. I mean, they put people off in so many ways. I mean, I don't know if I looked at, when I was researching for we were hiring a senior journalism job, and I did a bit of a research around it. And I mean, I swear to God, have any of you read like some of the job descriptions are out there? I mean, a unicorn wouldn't be able to do some of these jobs. It's incredible. And I think for, you know, older people who have kind of been out of the workforce, their confidence is lower, and they think, my God, you know, I've never heard of some of these things, and it stops them from applying, and I think that's terrible. So I think it really matters how you phrase those job descriptions. But there is literally no downside that I can think of having a mixed workforce if you can. I mean, there are issues around the finance to be solvable, because we seem to be able to solve finances. When one thing around the first question that you asked, Deborah, around what would I fix, I just think this is such a big area that is overlooked, is the policies of companies. And policies of companies are in desperate need of overhauling on so many levels. Not just related to women in particular, but I think, you know, it skews, it discriminates against women massively, but it also discriminates in age. And I think that, you know, any leader worth their socks right now should be looking through all of their policies and checking if they're in line with where society is today. And on the whole, they'll find that it's not. And if there's one thing I could change, if I could have a magic wand right now to help women of older age, and I don't think that I will be granted this wish in my lifetime. But we talk about the gender pay gap in the UK, which is a really big deal. The pension gap is extraordinary. Women coming out of the workforce at 55 or plus, they are so much worse off than men, so much worse off. So to me, it's an absolute scandal that the pension gap is not spoken about in the same vein as the pay gap in workforce.
Deborah, I want to come back to you in regards to what Enki just said, and also what the lawyer told you, which is you need to reinvent yourself. The onus is on you to basically redirect your career. But as you and I know, the traditional career arc is disappearing these days.
Yes.
And what we're having, instead of rising up through your 20s, 30s and 40s and then sort of phasing out in your 50s and 60s, is disappearing. And we're having a series of career arcs. You're perhaps one of the people I know who've been very successful at reinventing yourself. I mean, but how sustainable is it?
It's exhausting. I want to curse and say it's effing exhausting. You know, I have been a war photographer, and then I saw, you know, I was a war photographer during the pre-digital years when you had to get filmed to the airport, and then I saw the digital writing on the walls, like, oh, this is not going to be a sustainable career. Then I went into TV journalism for 6 years, and then and at the time when I went into TV journalism at ABC, it was all the underlings had short skirts and long legs, and all the people above us were male and were sleeping with the underlings. It was, you know, it was the 90s, and Kate and I were reminiscing about who was sleeping with whom at day one when I was working there, and then suddenly I start writing books, and that was a sustainable industry, and now publishing is becoming unsustainable for an older woman. Literally, I published, you know, Lady Parts, which is an older lady memoir, and I was told over and over again that that an older woman's memoir won't sell. Well, that's not true. And also, 85% of book buyers, guess who they are? They're older women. 85% of book buyers who buy 10 books or more a year are older women.
May I?
Yeah.
May I?
Of course.
May I interject? And I hear exactly what you're saying, but I have a different frame on it, which is no matter where you work, no matter how old you are, no matter if you're male or female, you have to constantly be reinventing yourself, even if you're in the same company for 33 years as I was. There is no job anymore, even, you know, making widgets on an assembly line, that does not change over time, that you can still do exactly the same thing that you started doing at the beginning. Granted, it is much higher. The bar is much higher. The older you get, the bar is much higher for women. But there is no way you can have a career anymore without reinventing yourself every few years.
Kate, you and I have also talked about the Great Resignation.
Yes.
And how much is that impacting the various age groups in terms of people now either not wanting to return to work or those who do or desperately seeking a job?
Well, I don't really have all the numbers at my fingertips, but I will just say of the people that I know, there are a number of people who decided, I'm just done with it. It's too hard. I'm going to quit. I'm going to reinvent myself and do something else. And of those, a number have said, maybe not so much, because it's hard. It's hard. The Great Resignation. It isn't always, the grass is, seems greener on the other side, and it isn't always the case.
But what impact has it had as you've gone out there looking for potential employees?
I have to tell you, any journalism organization that is hiring over 100 people has people knocking down the doors to get in. We have been incredibly lucky. Now, there are also a lot of other news organizations in the U.S. doing broadcast video, digital video, that are reinventing themselves and hiring a lot of people. It's an interesting time in our business in the U.S. where there are more jobs open than I've seen in a decade.
And yet, I've spoken to hiring managers. Again, no one will go on the record. And those hiring managers are being told, hire the young and the inexpensive.
Yes.
They're being told that. We want 3 of this kind of person instead of 1 of us, right? And at some point, hiring managers are going to have to say, you know what, I'm going to pay for experience. Why wouldn't you pay for experience? We have, I'm 56 years old. I have over 3 decades of experience as a journalist. Pay for it.
But the problem is who's running the show at the moment. And the reality is that there are very few women in senior positions, but there are also very few people above 55 and beyond as well. And so as a result, like promote like hires like. Is that not the case?
No, that's very much the case. And that is one of the important nuggets of what we are all trying to do in exploring all aspects of DEI. Like has always hired like. And I think every smart organization is trying to break that mold, but in all sorts of ways,
I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I have 3 women panellists here because we're going to talk about the M word. Channel 4 launched the UK media industry's first dedicated menopause policy aimed at supporting their employees experiencing menopausal symptoms and also providing guidance for managers. Now, ours is a brutal industry where pregnancy, childcare receives scant nod among our management. The thought of newsroom managers talking about menopause and the impact that it has on a sizable chunk of its staff is unthinkable, isn't it? Deborah, I'll start with you.
So, I've written a lot about menopause. I feel like I was somewhat of an expert on it, and yet I'm learning new things every day that we should have learned. And I want to give some statistics for a second. Only 6.8% of doctors, and this was a 2018 study, only 6.8% of doctors who work in OBGYN, family medicine, or urology feel adequately prepared to deal with women in menopause. Those are our doctors, okay? We can't even expect our companies to be prepared to deal with us in menopause. But the problem with that is we have so little knowledge. Even the doctors have little knowledge. So when we are getting hot flashes and when we are getting brain fog and when we are getting massive headaches, right, there's actually an easy fix. And that easy fix is hormone replacement therapy, which is now called menopause hormone treatment, all right, MHT. It works. It fixes things. And nobody's prescribing it. Why? Because the WHI, the Women's Health Initiative, that came out in 2000 whatever, you had Matt Lauer going on the Today Show saying you can get breast cancer if you're on hormone replacement. Guess what? That is not what that study said. And so we've had a generation of women who've been discouraged our generation of women has been discouraged from taking the very easy fix to keep us from having all of these hot flashes and all of these menopausal symptoms because we had bad data. And in fact, the data was, if you're an airline, what is the word that we use now instead of stewardess, because I'm an old person?
Flight
attendant. If you're a flight attendant, you have an 8% chance of getting breast cancer more than the general public. Don't laugh at me. If you are on hormone replacement, that was brain fog. If you're on hormone replacement, it's like 0.1. I don't remember the exact statistic, but it's statistically insignificant, and yet we've now discouraged for the past 2 decades women of my age and women who are going through menopause or coming up through menopause to not take a simple medication that can keep us all from that. Now, to get back to your, what does the newsroom do about that? They do nothing, right? They don't even publish the stories about it. You know, what I was just saying about that article I wrote for the major newspaper, they won't even publish the stories.
Okay, Inky or...
First of all, I think we should, give Channel 4, a lot of credit for doing what they did. But they are, there are other companies that are doing that. So I think it's important for us to recognize that there is we're going in the right direction when it comes to that. I mean, it's something that was such a massive taboo before is now actually starting to come into the conversation. And I think the other thing is you think that women can only kind of function between some childbearing age and a menopause, and after that it's like done. And I just want to, menopause is just a phase, and then it will be finished, and women will carry on and be just as good leaders during and after. So I think that's, we have to stop, again, talking about it like it's something weird. But I do think that we have to recognize successes where they are happening, and there are conversations about it taking place, and companies are sort of starting to wake up to that this is okay, we can talk about it, nobody's going to get offended, it's just a way of life. And as you say, 51% of the population goes through it, and, but again, it will probably take a woman going through menopause to get it done, and I think that's a shame.
Now, to leave time for any questions from the audience, I'm going to ask one final question to all of you, and that is, given what you now know, what would you tell your younger self, Kate?
Fasten your seatbelt.
Deborah?
Well, I have a daughter, and she's 25. And I told her to go into a career that doesn't end when you turn 50, and she's in medical school right now.
Inky?
Oh, it's like, the most difficult question.
There are too many things, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Too many things that we want to tell ourselves.
But, we're all journalists, and we know how to drill it down to a 25-word paragraph, so...
I think I would tell myself saying, the battle that you thought was won at this point isn't, yes. And you're going to be a big part of it. You're going to make a difference. You are going to stand in front of people. You're going to make a stand on it, and all of that will make a difference. But it's not going to be an easy one. I think that's hopefully an aspirational one, but a realistic one as well.
Okay, at this point, because of COVID restrictions, we can't provide people with microphones, but what I would ask, if you stand up, keep your mask on if indeed you wish to ask a question, and also specify which panellists you'd like to direct the question to. So if you could please put your hand up. Anybody here who'd like to ask a question? Yes. Deborah, just before you answer that, I need to repeat the question because Francesca, that's okay. Basically, the question was that the person understood that Deborah had been a writer on the first series of Emily in Paris, but wasn't for the second season. Was ageism a reason?
I have to read from here. I apologize if my book gave the misleading impression that I was not properly credited on Emily in Paris. I was a consultant on the pilot and a staff writer on the series. I am happy to have been part of the creative team of this highly successful series.
Yeah, a follow-up.
I didn't really understand what you were saying. I was asking whether was it ageism related or
I apologize if my book gave the misleading impression that I was not properly credited on Emily in Paris. I was a consultant on the pilot and a staff writer on the series. I am happy to have been part of the creative team of this highly successful series.
Okay, I think the statement has been made. Are there any other questions in the audience there? Anybody else who'd like to ask a question? Yes.
There's data from a lot of recent academic reports about how young people are disengaged from the news.
I'm really sorry. Can you stand up? And the mask makes it so difficult.
I know, okay, I'll try to project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my question is, there's data from recent academic reports, data collection efforts, that young people are disengaged from the news compared to previous generations, also compared to other cohorts of young people, this particular set of Gen Zers. And hence, it seems kind of logical that newsrooms have sort of made a push to cater to that audience because they seem a little more disengaged. So given what you all spoke about today, how do you square that goal with the purpose of this panel and the important issues that you brought up today? Because they seem both important, but don't seem to intersect it, and I was very curious to hear what you all have to say.
Yeah, and that was a question I was certainly going to ask. I mean, I'm going to rephrase it, that basically the person was effectively asking how millennials or Gen Z friendly is this story treatment a dominant agenda setting question? How can we make sure that we're not abandoning both ends of the age groups as such, both aging audiences and younger audiences, in pursuit of genuine diversity? Inky, would you like to start off?
Yeah, I mean, I think we sort of, as we talked about earlier, I think we can't afford to do that as an industry, and it's our job to reach all of the population. I think what I would sort of challenge is that, just because you're over a certain age, you can't speak to younger people. Or if you're young, you can't speak to older people. And I think that it's that idea in society that we just have to crack. It's kind of funny, not that we want to get really personal here, but I mean, my 14-year-old is annoyed with me that I breathe, it's just, I wake up and I'm uncool and I breathe. Her friends, on the other hand, think I'm pretty cool, So as long as I'm not broadcasting to my daughter specifically, I think that I could have a lot to say to that age group. Equally, I think that they would have a lot to say to the older people. I just think that, this idea that you have to be a certain, that if you're between, 20 and 25, you can only speak to those people, or if you're between 50 and 55, you can only speak to those people. I don't think that that's necessarily true, and therefore the sort of mixing it together where you can have a genuine, diverse conversation is where we need to be. And can I recognize one thing which isn't related to your question, but you did remind me when you stood up. So Rita was supposed to be on this panel, who unfortunately couldn't be with us, so I was a late addition. But I want to recognize the privilege that we have working in the Western world as white women. And, I cannot even imagine how difficult it must be to work in the global South, to kind of deal with more patriarchal societies around these issues, around ageism and sexism and all that. So I just want to, recognize my own privilege here and say that I'm sorry that Rita couldn't be here because she would have given a different perspective.
Absolutely, and just to stress that, I'm sorry, I should have said that from the outset if you're wondering why Inky's sitting here instead of Ritu Kapoor, who's the CEO of the Quint. She had applied for permission to leave India, but the Supreme Court hearing kept being pushed back to the point that she decided it wasn't worth coming, and she would have added so much to this discussion. Is there anything else that the other panelists would like to respond to?
Well, I just want to say very quickly, I think a lot of the issue is not so much about the content, but about the distribution and how to reach different viewers in different places, because as technology develops, young people grab onto the newest, coolest way of getting the news, and if you're not, as a news organization, if you're not in those places, then you're doing yourself a disservice.
Deborah?
You know, again, so I have children who are 26, 25, and 15, and they have taught me so much about the new technologies, about TikTok, about Instagram, about all the ways in which we can reach a younger audience, where my words can reach a younger audience. And I think that we should all, I mean, we should not, when we talk about ageism, there's also ageism against younger women as well. And so we, you know, a younger woman coming out of college, 22, she's experiencing ageism as well. They think, oh, well, she can't handle it. You know, again, I covered Afghanistan at 22. Did I do a great job? No, I did an adequate job. But we can't discriminate against any. It's essentially a woman is born, she goes to college, then 22 to like 27, she's discriminated against for being too young. Then she starts having kids, she's discriminated against for having babies. Then as soon as her kids are older, she's discriminated against because she's older. There's like a whole series of discrimination that we have to talk about, deal with. Again, I come back to the idea of mentorship. We need to all be mentoring each other, and that includes you mentoring me about youth, and my daughter and our kids mentoring. We have to keep talking to each other and stop making these divisions.
There's somebody else at the back there. Yes. Could you stand up, please? And I'm going to ask you to project. Thank you. That is somebody, by the way, for the purpose of our live streaming and recording, who stood up to say, as a 51-year-old journalist, she was fired, and all the sentiments that have been expressed in this session is something that very much resonates with her.
I was just asked about digital newsrooms, particularly for you, Inky. I don't know if you remember me, I'm Kamisha. I used to work before at the BBC. We talked about it.
Hi.
My question is, at 34, I feel I'm old for a digital newsroom. Because there are people, you know, we have Facebook stories, we have 45-second stories, we have all of that. I think it is important to talk about digital newsrooms, and because you have led a team. What is it that people like me should do? And also like the whole idea of how editorially as well their stories need to still be told more, you know, like the storytelling way should still be developed. I come from a broadcast background, but in the digital newsroom, what are the things that older generation, younger generation can really learn from each other, from your experiences?
And I'm just going to very quickly recap again. That was somebody standing up who's said that she was 34 years old, didn't mind saying her age, because that's the difference between you and me. And even she is struggling with the notion of digital journalism. She feels she's too old. So she's asking Inky, as somebody who's led a digital team, what can be done?
First of all, nice to see you again. It's, you know, I mean, isn't it extraordinary that you would feel old in a newsroom at 34? I mean, that just, you know, says it all about where we are, and I'm you know, and I'm sure that's echoed in all genders. I mean, I think that, you know, we shouldn't, I think one thing is you can't be complacent. You know, we all have to, like, I mean, Kate alluded to, we all have to keep reinventing ourselves. We have to keep learning. We have to kind of find, you know, different ways of distributing to the audience. We have to think about new ways of doing it, new ways of looking at stories. So, you know, we can never sit there and think, well, I know it all now, I'm done, you know, and now I'm just gonna, you know, sit here and project my wisdom to all of you. I mean, that is definitely not the case, and we're in a world where you are constantly going to be learning. You know, unlike, I think, the generation before us, you know, in a way, because we're having to deal with it all sort of through the newsroom. I mean, I'm born in Iceland, and I worked on a farm where they had a phone where they had like 3 long, 2 shorts. I mean, that's in the space of my lifetime that I've gone from that to TikTok. So, you know, I think that we have to kind of constantly be learning. That's one thing. And that, I think, keeps you fresh. You know, it keeps you kind of going and active. The other thing is keep your confidence up. I mean, you're brilliant at what you do. You know what you should be doing, but you're starting to doubt yourself, you know, or people start to doubt themselves because they think, oh, I'm getting older, so-and-so knows something else. If they know this, you know that. Together, you know, you're going to be a winning formula. And I think keeping that confident up and keep on learning would be my sort of major advice. And I just think that it's really bad when people start to doubt their ability to do something because someone else is doing something others. You know, I mean, it's also the valuing of one skill over another. You know, being able to make a TikTok video, which I can't do, by the way, you know, over being able to write a good copy and get it out quicker. One is not more valuable than the other. It's a different skill set of reaching the audiences. So I would say that.
We've run out of time at this point, and so I think the overriding lesson from all of this is we all can learn from one another. Can you please give a warm round of applause to my wonderful panellists? Thank you.